Well, hello and welcome to this 1 hour session on how to homeschool. So the aim of this session is for you to be able to go away confident that you can start your homeschooling journey in under an hour. And we're going to go through a lot. So I hope you'll have a pencil and a paper and just take some notes as you go along the way. So what we'll be covering in this course or in this slideshow, if you like, is basically what we cover, a lot of what we cover in my homeschool parenting program, which is a more comprehensive course on how to homeschool. So let's get started. I've got a slideshow as well, so we can keep going through that. So yeah, the aim of what we're going to cover is to help you homeschool in less than an hour. So we're going to start with the deschooling, which is what you do before you even start homeschooling, and I'll explain why that is. Then we're going to cover the homeschool methods. There's quite a few homeschool methods, but we'll cover the most popular ones in detail and also look at why they are most popular and why you might want to use some of them in your homeschool. We'll cover laws. We'll look at them briefly, what you can expect, what you might have in your state. They're all fairly different. And then we're going to look at homeschool curriculum, which is a whole world. And homeschool curriculum is probably the most popular subject when you look at YouTube videos and those sorts of things. Anything with homeschool curriculum in the title usually does pretty well because parents are pretty interested in changing or finding a new one or finding something that just works better for their family. And then we're going to look at the importance of getting into a homeschool group. This is really important because socialization, it's usually valued by a lot of homeschool parents, but some homeschool parents aren't quite convinced about it. Having homeschooled myself, I think it's really important, and I've talked to a lot of homeschool graduates as well some of them who didn't enjoy their experience, and it was usually because they didn't have a lot of social opportunities, which is really sad. And then we're going to talk about some tips, some things to avoid burnout, and some just things that will really help you in your homeschool journey. A lot of these things, these particular tips are in the homeschool parenting program, so I'm drawing a lot of them out of that. And then we're just going to chat about starting your homeschool. So the first one we're going to talk about is deschooling. So this is basically trying to take out the institutionalized mindset you might have had when you went to school. So most of us went to school. We grew up in a school situation. You go to school, your teacher sit you down, and then you do your curriculum, and then you might move from class to class and cover subjects. Well, if you do that in a homeschool, well, let's just say it's not the best way you can do homeschooling. And you can do homeschool, the hours you spend doing formal curriculum in a homeschool is much, much less than you would spend in school. So in school, you spend around 6 hours at school doing your formal curriculum, moving from class to class. There's a lot of busy work, which accounts for a lot of that time. And just in a homeschool situation, you can only spend probably 2 hours, 3 hours, and that is completely enough. So you have all that free time to do whatever you want, whether that's to go on field trips, whether that's to get children to follow an entrepreneurial dream they might hold, or if it's just to figure out a portfolio. Perhaps if you wanted to get into medicine, you might start doing some volunteering, or you need a portfolio to get into some other course. You've got lots of spare time if you're homeschooling. So we were talking about deschooling. So that's deschooling, is deinstitutionalizing your mindset. So the reason that you want to start doing this, before formal curriculum, and the reason is firstly to rest. So a lot of the time, homeschool parents are pulling their kids out of school and they're exhausted. The parents are exhausted because they're dealing with their kids' problems, and probably there's a lot of mental problems. Perhaps there's bullying or there's bad peer influences. So this is just a time to rest and trying to do a little bit of damage control, before you push them into sort of more formal curriculum down the road. The deschooling period is also a time when you can research. You can take time to look into homeschooling methods and curriculum. Now, if you just launch straight into looking in straight into a curriculum, what you'll often find is there's going to be a lot of pushback from your kids who are like looking at you and going, you're not my teacher, hang on, why are you teaching me again? Whereas if you have that rest period, it's a time for them to kind of think about, well, you're their new teacher, or they're going to be hopefully teaching themselves as well, taking on a bit of that. So time for them to think about that, instead of just having that old mindset of pushing back on you. And also, you're not often going to have a lot of other time to look into methods and curricula if you don't do it during this time. So the deschooling period is a good time to do it. How long should you deschool? They generally say deschool, the recommendation is 1 month for every year a child has spent in school. Now, if you have high school children, this is obviously not going to work because you can't spend 12 months deschooling if your child is in year 12. So I would say deschool for a period where it's going to work for your family, where you find your children are starting to become more relaxed and perhaps a little bit more open to formal curriculum. So you'll generally find this takes a few months perhaps. And so this will help you really restart the whole educational process, and you can start on the right foot and not rush in so you don't get things wrong. So it's really, really important. I can't stress that enough to deschool your kids. Okay, so next we're going to chat about the homeschooling methods. There's a whole realm of these. A lot of people say there's 10, some people say there's 7, some people say there's 7 homeschool methods and then a few little bits on the side. We'll chat about that as we go through. So the most popular homeschooling method is the traditional homeschooling method. Probably the reason it's most popular is not so much that it is the best in all situations, but that it is the closest to school. So it's very familiar. A lot of the traditional homeschool curriculum programs you'll get actually give their curriculum to schools, and schools do them. So Abeka and I think BJU, which is the curriculum that I use, are examples of this, is they actually use them in schools, the curriculum in Christian schools. So the idea with these is that you get a box of books in the mail and teachers' manuals, and you can sit there and you can teach them to your children. And then these days, with everything going online, a lot of these companies like BJU Press and Abeka are offering video lessons as well. So you'll get a box in the mail, it's mailable, and then the child will open up their curriculum and they can do that, and the teacher can teach them face to face, or if you prefer to have everything offline, you can use the teacher's manual to teach that to your children. Then the next one is the classical method. So this method is what was the traditional method, but 2,000 years ago. So it's what you'd find St. Paul, Aristotle, even a lot of Charles Dickens' books talk about the classical method being used. So a lot with the classical method, you've got the 3 stages of the trivium. I have a video about this, so I can link it below on classical education, but it's whole other world. So if you're interested in that, I'll link down to other videos on these methods down below in the description box. But you've got the trivium, which is the grammar stage for early school or primary school. Then you've got the logic stage, which is the middle school stage. And then you've got the rhetoric stage, which is the high school stage. And the idea is to give children the tools of learning early on, and then teach them how to think about it critically and do argumentation and logic. And the rhetoric stage is all about using the things you've learned previously, those tools and all of that logic that you've learned, and applying it in a way that you're able to speak persuasively and winningly to your audience with wisdom. The next method is the Charlotte Mason method, and I think this is a wonderful method, and that is because Charlotte Mason was herself a classical educator who kind of thought that classical education in her day was a bit too rigorous, a bit too rigid for children. And so she said, we need something that, yes, encourages children to learn good books and get a really good education and a really good reading basis, but we need to do that gently, and we need to teach children through habits as well. We need to teach children using nature. And the other wonderful thing about Charlotte Mason is that she taught her material to home tutors, nannies, and people who would be educating children. She would teach people who were going to be in the homeschooling environment. And so this is very much a method that is suited specifically for the homeschool situation, whereas you'll find traditional and classical and some of the other methods, they're usually made for schools, not with Charlotte Mason. And I love that about Charlotte Mason. Charlotte Mason was also a wonderful Christian as well. So the other thing with homeschool methods to keep in mind is that a lot of Christian people are making homeschool curriculum these days, and that's because the majority of people who are homeschooling from a Christian standpoint. They're Christians. Next, we have the eclectic method. So eclectic just means kind of different bits from here and there as a rough definition. So if you're using the eclectic method, it means that you might be taking bits from the traditional method, bits from the classical method, and bits from the Charlotte Mason method, and incorporating them into your homeschool. So for example, in my own homeschool, I use the BJU Press curriculum. That's traditional, but then I also use the Schoolhouse teachers curriculum, which has a lot of things on it, and that very firmly puts us in the eclectic category. And then very soon I'm going to start doing Latin with my son, and that will have a little bit of classical. So if you're using lots of method, it means you're using an eclectic method essentially. And I think probably most homeschool parents are using the eclectic method. It's almost difficult to only stick to one method so rigidly. Next, there is the unschooling method. So this is interesting. A lot of people say that unschooling is not homeschooling, and a lot of people say that unschooling is on the very, very, very relaxed end of homeschooling, in that you would have unschooling here, which is very, very relaxed, and then you might have, your traditional and then your classical education. Charlotte Mason might be more of here towards the more relaxed side of things. And that is because unschooling is child-led learning, whereas homeschooling is more parent-led learning. And I think a good homeschool has both parent and child speaking into the education. Obviously, parents have more wisdom and are guiding children, but children should also have a say in what they're interested in. And what that will do if children have a say is they'll be more interested, so they'll have more motivation. If you incorporate interest-based learning, curiosity-based learning, you'll find you have a better homeschool because the child really wants to learn, and that's really wonderful. And you'll find you're not pushing against the grain. You'll find it's a more satisfying homeschool when you do that, because your child will be saying, hey mum, can we watch a video on this today? Or hey mum, can we go and do a field trip on this? Or hey mum, let's go do this. Whereas if you're saying, no, we can't do that, we need to do this, they'll be like, oh goodness me, this is, like pulling a tooth out or something like that. So try and really incorporate that. I think unschooling does that well. There's been some criticism with unschooling in that there's a branch of unschooling called radical unschooling, and this is letting a child completely decide what they want to do. So they can stay up for as long as they want at night, they can play as many video games as they want, they can eat what they want. And parents of radical unschoolers will say that the child will make the right choices, and if that's what they need that. So it's all whole interesting thing which we won't get into. But having said that, I think a little bit of unschooling or a little bit of child-led learning is okay in the context of having the parents having wisdom to direct studies themselves. Next, we have the unit studies method, and I love this because I've seen a lot of particularly homeschooling bloggers producing their own unit studies. So these are mums who have a real passion for a particular subject. For example, they might have a particular subject on sea creatures, and you do a specific homeschool study on those sea creatures, and you might incorporate science. You know, what is the science of water? What is the science of, breathing gills? Those sorts of things. You might incorporate history. You might look at Moby Dick, which is that story of the famous whale who attacked the ship. You might incorporate math in that study, work out, how many million tons of ocean are in this particular spot. So the idea is to incorporate lots of subjects into that unit. So it's learning in a very different way from the traditional method. And unit studies is a great way to break up the monotony of homeschooling. If you're finding homeschooling a little bit boring, then you might want to go, hey kids, let's have a look at this unit studies website, these unit studies that are being offered, and grab one of them and let's do that. Let's have a little break from our normal curriculum and use this one. And so you can get your child interested that way. What do we have next? So we have the literature-based approach. So this is the approach, for example, I don't know if you've heard of Sunlight, which is a lovely Christian curriculum. It is basically trying to teach children using primarily a massive selection of books. So when you get a Sunlight curriculum, their curriculum can be quite expensive, but that's because you get all of these books. And the idea is that children learn through these really high quality books. So with Charlotte Mason, she had books that she called living books. So the idea with living books is that parents could teach their children using textbooks that are a bit more like educational storybooks than boring textbooks, which is often what people used to see in the classical method. But then the classical method also said that we need to teach children using great books, which are the tried and true classics, if you like. Two examples of great books would be the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so I think the literature-based approach is perhaps an amalgamation of living books and the great books from the classical tradition. And so programs like Sunlight, I think there's also Moving Beyond the Page, which is a secular one. Yeah, use that literature-based approach. Just chuck books at kids, get them into the habit of reading, and then they're going to be able to just develop based on that. All right, and then you have, let's deal with lap booking first. So lap booking is not really a homeschooling method on its own, but I think it's a little bit like unit studies. It really helps with your curriculum if it's getting a little bit monotonous and boring. What am I doing? Do you want to come and have a look? All right. Well, do you want to shut the door then? Yeah. Okay, you shut the door. Yep. Bye. See ya. So lap booking is usually just looking at a particular unit, for example, Egypt, and then making little mini books which go into the big kind of major portfolio folder book. So if you're looking at Egypt, you might study biology, you might look at frogs, for example, and then you might study history using the pharaohs when they were doing their thing. So that would be history, and then you might do math using cubic square miles of the mapping. There's lots of things obviously you could study for Egypt and lap booking, for example. Now let's chat about the Montessori method. So this method was made for use in preschools by Maria Montessori. So it's very much a method that is suited for particularly younger children, and that's because it's very hands-on. Younger children find it hard to sit still, but they find learning through their hands particularly helpful. And so there's a lot of Montessori homeschools out there. Just children who won't suit going to school. They're not the square, they're the square peg that doesn't fit in the round hole, school being the round hole. And so Montessori education is a great way for children to learn more with their hands. Waldorf is quite similar. They have a different way of teaching, but often Waldorf and Montessori are fairly comparable. I'm sure probably a lot of Montessori and Waldorf teachers will hate me for saying that, but compared to the other homeschooling methods, they're a little bit more similar that way. All right, so curriculum, this is its own whole world. There are so many curriculum packages out there, and it can be very stressful for a homeschooling parent. There's this elusive concept of finding the right homeschool curriculum. What I will say is that you want to try and pick a curriculum that is good for your family. So don't just look at an attractive one, but think about what are your kids like? Would they prefer a more hands-on curriculum? Is having a Christian curriculum a really important thing for you? What else do you want in a homeschool curriculum? Do you want it to be mailable? Do you want everything to be offline? Do you want everything to be online so you don't have to deal with transcripts? Or perhaps you're short-term homeschooling and you want something a little bit more like an online school. So have a really sit down and think about what you want your homeschool to look like. What I love about the Charlotte Mason curriculum is it's a very outdoorsy curriculum, and I like that about it. So for me, I use BJU Press. I love getting the curriculum in the mail and sitting down with that. There we are. So that's the BJU Press. I like it. It's traditional. It's Christian. It really focuses on inculcating children with a Christian worldview, and I love that about it. But sometimes I get a little bit sick of teaching with the teacher's manuals, and so I like to get the video lessons online with BJU Press. And now I also use Schoolhouse Teachers. They have an incredible deal. You can get curriculum for your whole family. So with BJU Press, you have to buy it individually for the children. With Schoolhouse Teachers, you can get curriculum for your whole family for the same price, and they're very affordable. So I've linked them both below. By the way, they are affiliate links because I am an affiliate with BJU Press. What that means is if you purchase the curriculum through the links down below, then I get a little bit of that money, and it helps me to be able to make videos like that and helps me support my family as well. So do be aware that they are affiliate links, and if you buy through that, it does help me out. So thank you if you do. But I love Schoolhouse Teachers because there's so many courses. The other thing I like about Schoolhouse Teachers is that it has your traditional open and go boxes, which I like. So if you want to go down that traditional route, you can. It's also got loads of Charlotte Mason sources, information on nature study and nature walks and living books. And then if you love the classical method, it has things like helping you figure out how to debate, debating resources. Also, it teaches Latin and logic, which are very much down the classical route. Now let's go up here. Yeah, so let's have a chat about laws. So if you are in America, then you can find your laws by going to the HSLDA. So this is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association in America. And so they will give you really amazing legal advice because there's so many states in America and it can be quite confusing. The other thing about the HSLDA is that you can get membership. So that means if you run into any legal difficulties or the government is saying this, then you can go back and you can ask the HSLDA. You can get advice for them. And if you get in really bad trouble and you have a court case perhaps that you need to go to, you can use your membership and they will actually defend you in court. And they're lawyers who know their stuff on homeschooling as well. So that's a really wonderful resource if you're an American homeschooler. Now, if you are in another country, it's probably easiest to go to the government websites and check out the information they have on homeschooling as well. So for example, I'm in Australia and I would just type in homeschool laws in New South Wales and the government website for New South Wales education will come up, and it has a PDF on exactly what you need to do and a PDF showing you the laws. You can also call them if you need further clarification. Another thing I found really interesting is when I went onto Facebook, there's actually Facebook support groups if you're starting the registration process. So if you're getting really confused and you want somebody to talk to about laws, you can either do that, for example, in your homeschooling group, which we'll get to later. You can ask other homeschool mums, or you can ask in the forums online with Facebook, because that's a much broader range, which is wonderful. So what to expect with your laws? What can you expect that you need to do? So the first one, most common one, is that, well, first of all, you might not need to have to follow any homeschool laws. You might just need to register, or sometimes you don't even need to register at all. Some states are really lax and pretty relaxed with that sort of stuff. For example, Texas, and others are not. But often you'll need to follow a syllabus. So the government will say, we want you to teach these things in your homeschool, and you'll have to try and incorporate that into your routine schedule, whatever it is you're doing. And then you could have inspector visits in New South Wales. They'll send out people to your home or via a Zoom link, and they will chat to your children and have a look over your schedule, what you're going to teach them, and make sure that's lining up with what the government wants you to teach them. Keep in mind that a lot of people don't register, which is illegal, but I guess they take that risk. And then there's also record keeping, so keeping a portfolio of what your children did, what they completed, the subjects they're doing. Another thing you might be required to do is keep an hours log of the homeschool hours you're doing. So the governments often require homeschool parents to spend a certain number of hours teaching their children. I haven't heard of that in Australia, but I believe it's done in some American states. Very rarely you might be required to have a higher education degree, a college degree, or a high school diploma perhaps as a minimum. That's very, very rare to have that. I think there's only one state in America, perhaps there's more, to do that. But even if you don't have that, you can also get a teacher to supervise what you're doing as well. So you can get around that too. So don't worry about that. So they're just some of the things you can expect. There are obviously some other regulations. And it's a little bit daunting when you look at it, but it's actually pretty doable. So if you're feeling a little bit anxious about this, number one, I encourage you to do the homeschool parenting program, which will really decrease your stress surrounding a lot of that. And we talk a lot more about homeschool laws in that too. But also chat to other homeschool parents in homeschool groups or online on those Facebook groups to decrease your stress in those areas. Okay, and then let's chat about homeschool groups. So you can find, so the benefit of being in a homeschool group is that you get that support. As I said, if you're a bit worried about homeschool laws, you can talk to other homeschool parents about your options and how they went through it, because they will have navigated that whole area themselves. So it's wonderful to really draw on that. The other thing is when you're homeschooling, it's a bit like having a baby, is you have so many questions and you want somebody to run them past, and a homeschool group will give you that ability to run all these things past with homeschool veterans, parents who've done all this before. And you'll find that that really helps your homeschool journey. There was a couple of times during when I was homeschooled myself, when my parents had all these questions and they're like, perhaps we should just send the children back to school. They had a quick chat with other homeschool parents in the group, and they found that they were able to continue homeschooling based on the advice they were given. So I really recommend getting into a homeschool group. The other reason it's really important, obviously, is socialization for your children. I often hear of a lot of homeschool graduates who say, golly, I hated my homeschool experience. And the number one reason is that their parents didn't value socializing them, didn't value their children having friends their own age or different ages, and they just kept them at home, and it was pretty isolating, and they thought, this isn't any good. And so that's the other reason. So your kids don't blame you, and so they end up normal. Whatever that is. All right, so homeschool groups, how can you find one? So the best way, I think probably the easiest way to find a homeschool group is through Facebook, especially if you're not in America. So you can go to the community tab, you can type in the community tab your location, for example, Illawarra or Wollongong, and then type in homeschool group and see what comes up. The most relevant ones will come up. And then you can join that group and contact the admins in that group and get yourself in that way. I found Facebook is the way that most homeschool parents around me communicate and tell people about things that are going on. The other one is homeschool.com. This is a great one if you are in America, because you just have the homeschool meetups, who the contact details are, and the numbers right there and then. You don't even need to go through Facebook, which I think is wonderful, because a lot of homeschool parents are a little bit more alternative, and a lot of us don't like being on Facebook. I know that's certainly for me. If I could do everything off Facebook, I would be so happy. But you can do that with homeschool.com. I'm not sure if the HSLDA also has groups. Don't quote me on that one. They may or may not, but that's a really good way. Obviously, you can also Google if there's any homeschool groups around your area. That's another option. Another one is churches. Churches tend to have a very high homeschooling population. And yeah, a lot of people are homeschooling because they don't like the way that public schools aren't allowing religious education and prayer and Bible reading in anymore. And so they think to themselves, well, I want my child to know about God. And so they start homeschooling, and hence a lot of people in church homeschool. So you can ask your pastor about if there's any homeschool families in your church. You'll generally find there's at least one or two. We grew up in a church, and half of the church was homeschooling. It was really, really wonderful. And then growing up, our homeschool group was also our church group. So for socialization, that was wonderful, because we would get to see them once during church, and then we would see them during Bible study, and then we would often see them during a homeschool meetup. And then when we were older, they'd also come over for sleepovers. So we were seeing them so much during the week, and then, you know, sometimes for soccer, those sorts of things. And then we talked about online, so just Googling it. And then there's the community. So you can ask community centres. This is a bit more spurious as a way to source a homeschool group, but that's another option if you're perhaps in a really rural area. They might know of some, people are pretty connected when it's a small community. All right, what do we got next? So tips. This is something I really wanted to get to. I think that there are just some things that really make for a better homeschool, and so I'm really glad to be able to cover, this is probably the most important part of this video, is to cover these tips. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please like and subscribe to the video, because I do lots of videos on how to homeschool for new and for experienced homeschool parents, so you're going to love it, I know. So hit that subscribe button. So the first tip I have for you is don't burn your kids out. A lot of people, when they get a curriculum in the mail, they'll sit down and do it with their children. A lot of the time they do it too early. They start their kids on the curriculum too early to begin with. So wait until your kid's showing a little bit of interest. And in a homeschool, you have the opportunity to start later and really let the child lead you and show you when they're ready. So try not to start them on curriculum if you're really sensing that might be a little bit too early. So the first one is don't burn your kids out. So what I'm talking about here is when you get a curriculum, perhaps you have a reading curriculum and you've got your child sitting next to you and you're pointing to things and they're enjoying it, and they get to a point where perhaps they're tired, or just perhaps they're not up to it, and their brain gets all fuzzy and they're getting really frustrated, and you're thinking, we just need to finish the lesson, because that's our schedule and we need to do what's on the schedule. Don't do that. Don't push through the tears, don't push through the frustration, because what you'll find will happen is tomorrow when you sit down to do another lesson with your child, the child will be thinking, goodness me, let's not do this, I hate this. They won't have enjoyed it. They'll be remembering what happened yesterday and how you forced them through tears, or you forced them through that extreme frustration, and they won't want to do it. Whereas if you just do a little bit and you stop when you sense their frustration, next day when you go back to that subject, you'll find that they're fresh. Now, what happens when every day you're sitting down with them and they're going, oh, let's not do this, please, don't do this to me, mummy. Well, that's a time when you want to start really just having a little break. Just sit down, just step back for a month or two, perhaps 3 months, and then come back to the material. Perhaps you can do extra lesson in other subjects that they're enjoying. Just pull back from that subject that they're doing. Often, like I said, we're doing it too early and they're just not perhaps at that mental stage where they're ready for that. I had to do this with my son the other day with our reading, is he just wasn't kind of enjoying it, wasn't getting it, and I could tell he had that block. And so we had 3 months off. I said, I'm going to give this kid a really good break. And then we started again, and he was fine. And the other thing we did is we tend to do a lot of things offline, because I'm not a big fan of screens, and I've noticed my kids get a little bit too anxious when there's too many screens. But I thought, it's a tool, screens, and so we actually went and we did a bit of reading on reading eggs, and that restarted him into the idea of, I can do reading, I can do this is fun. And he's not doing a lot of reading eggs now. He doesn't really enjoy it quite as much, so he's not doing much screens. But for a little time there, it was a really good bridge to kind of go, okay, I can do this is fun, I can do this. And so now he's reading it a lot more with me. Yeah, and so that leads into our next point, which is about trying to do things in a self-paced manner. So let your children really lead their own studies as much as they can. There are some really wonderful self-paced curriculum out there too. I think LifePack is an example of this, where children can do the curriculum entirely by themselves. Easy Peasy, which is a free homeschool curriculum, is also something that children can do themselves entirely once you teach them to read. The third point we have here is try to use a routine, not a schedule. I made a really fun YouTube short the other day where I had a blackboard behind me and I had a schedule which had the times running down there, and then the weeks running up here, and then all the subjects in their different spots with, lunch and a break here and a break there. And it was basically set out a bit like the schedule you'd find in school. And I said, the best way to deal with having a schedule is to make it into a routine. So delete all those times and delete all those times during the week, and just have your subjects there and just complete them at your own pace, at your own time through the week. So with Luke, instead of saying, okay, every morning at 9 o'clock we're going to sit down and do math, what we do is we have whole days off. We don't work. We only have a 4-day homeschool week. But there's some days where he will do, and he wants to do, 3 math lessons. And so we'll get, most of the week's work done in one morning because he's really in that frame set and that mindset. And I really encourage that as well. And that's the best way to learn, is when the child is really pacing themselves. They kind of know that they have to do it and that it's good for them, and you support them in that, but they're not getting frustrated too. So try and do that if you can. Like I said, if things aren't working with that particular routine, you could look at changing it up. You don't need to buy another curriculum. If you've bought a curriculum already, it can be quite expensive to buy another one. There are free curricula online that are perfectly good. If you're finding your current one doesn't work, you can look at Easy Peasy, which is one of my favorites. I can link it down below. And then there's also Ambleside Online, which is a free Charlotte Mason homeschool curriculum. But I think, the best one is probably Easy Peasy. The other thing, I haven't put it on here, but another really good tip, and I talk about this a lot in the homeschool parenting program, is getting your children into audiobooks. So I'll link it down below, but there's a free book list I've got down below. So you can go onto this book list and have a look at different books for different grade levels. Go onto YouTube, type in the name of the book, followed by audiobook, and let the child listen to the audiobook. By doing that, they're getting great language skills. I find my son, he's 5, and he has an incredible vocabulary because since he's been 3, he's been listening to loads of audiobooks. I think he's listened to probably hundreds of them. It's incredible the amount he's listening to and the things he gets. We were listening to James Herriot's All Creatures Great and Small, I think it's called, which is an audiobook for older children, a book for older adults even. And he is understanding that. It's only because we've been listening to audiobooks for a long time, and he's getting a really good handle on the language involved in that. So the fourth point I have here is get kids into nature. It's really, really important to get them outside, especially if you have toddlers. You're trying to homeschool with toddlers. I found getting your whole family outside is really helpful. It presses the reset button, especially if you've got a frustrated child who's doing their curriculum and things are really heating up. Get them outside. You can do your curriculum outside, and the children really love this. The other thing is that nature can be its own teacher. So we've started getting into nature walks. We don't yet carry a nature journal because Luke isn't very adept at sketching or writing yet because he's only 5. But when he's a little bit older, we're going to carry a nature journal, which can just be a pad and a paper. You can get formal ones as well, but just a pad and a paper, a blank one. And they can sketch out a tree when they see it. They can look at the tree names, research that tree, figure out what they do in different seasons, figure out what the tree produces, figure out if it's poisonous or not, if it's edible fruit or not. Do this with any plant you find. You can also look at the Latin names of things, look at how high it is, do a little bit of math on the tree trunk, look at, well, why is this tree trunk worn away here? Have the animals been scratching themselves on it? You know, why is there a hole in this tree? Is this termite damage, or is this an owl trying to make its nest in here? There's so many things that's just on a tree. There's so many things nature can teach you. When you find a bug, pick it up, take it home, feed it and observe it. Let's look at a bee as it collects nectar. Nature is beautiful, and it's such a wonderful teacher of children, and so I really encourage you to get out there. We went on nature walk the other day, and I was just teaching Luke how to read the map that was in the national park. You know exactly what the legend meant, and if we were here and we're going to go over there, how far is it from here to there? And then they have lots of placards along the way during our nature walk. So national parks, just even getting to your local park can teach kids a lot, and it's such a wonderful brain break for parents as well if you're stressed, if you're having a big day. Okay, 5th point is to teach them to do it themselves. Teach children who are homeschooling to become lifelong learners. This should be a big aim of homeschooling. So when children are young, when they're very young, you're going to be sitting by their side. You're going to be helping them draw letters. You're going to be helping them to add things up individually. You'll be spending more time at their side doing less homework. But as children get older, they'll start to do more homework, but you won't be sitting with them all the time. My parents used to say, you guys just homeschooled yourselves at the end. We were doing 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours of homeschooling ourselves in the end. But my parents, they said, you guys did it all. So don't think that, well, I don't have time to homeschool because if I've got to sit with my kid for 5 hours a day while they do their homework, that's not going to be the case. They kind of start doing things for themselves. And you as a parent, your job is to really encourage them to do things for themselves. Now this leads into the next point, generally, which is to keep the house clean. Now, if you're sitting there going, I have to clean up after my kids all the time, that's going to be a massive headache for you. So you really need to, if you're homeschooling, get your children to clean the house for you. Really set them an example of how you keep things neat and expect them all the time to clean up and pick up after themselves. And you'll find that your stress levels, your frustration levels, your contentment levels are so much better if you have a clean house. It's like, for me, I can think properly, whereas if things are not clean, I find that my thinking is clouded because I'm thinking, goodness me, this place is a mess. And my husband, I'm often thinking my husband's going to come home and say this is a mess, and it is a mess, and he's right. And then he'll be frustrated too. So really get your kids to help you with that. And I find that especially my older boy and even my little girl, they're learning how to clean the house themselves and keep it neat and tidy and organize their bookshelves and put things away. So really, encourage them to do that. The other thing is sometimes if you say, pick up your clothes or pick up your shoes or pick up this pen and put it away, they'll often go, oh, don't let them do that. You need to really encourage thankfulness in the place of complaining. You can't just say, don't complain. You need to actually try and replace complaining with being thankful. So instead of, oh, you know, golly, I have to do this, like, oh, aren't we glad that we've just been on such a great nature walk? Can we now please put our socks inside our shoes and our shoes on the shoe rack? This is just the common saying we have in our house. You know, when you get out of the car, you get your socks inside your shoes and you put them on the shoe rack. And yeah, I don't let my kids complain at all, because it's really bad as well is when they're adults. You hear a lot of adults who just have this habit of complaining, and it's really sad to see. So it would be really nice to create kids who don't complain. The other thing is, please take care of yourself as a homeschool mum. It's really important, because if you're not in the right frame of mind, your children won't be, and they won't want to learn, and things will be harder. So you set the tone as the homeschool parent. And also your husband will find it hard if you're feeling cranky or whatever. For me, I like to get up early in the morning and go for a long walk by myself, or alternatively in the evening when my children are asleep, I'll go for a big long walk by myself. I actually find this gives me more energy to, I guess, cut sleep off a little bit and go for a walk than to sleep in and not get that exercise. It's really interesting, but for me, it's definitely true. If you find there's another way to recharge, you try and get up early or do that late at night. It gives you a bit of, I guess the saying is me time, but that's actually really important to not just be in that kind of homeschool world. Just think outside the box. It's really great to get out for date nights as well. The Homeschool Parenting Program, which is the program that I run. So there are loads of really interesting videos to help you. We go through the homeschooling methods, we go through curriculum, all the different types, matching your homeschool curriculum to the homeschool method you've chosen. We go through a lot of the common homeschool mistakes I see homeschooling parents make that burn them out, and a lot of ways you can troubleshoot that, and just how to have a clean homeschool that is a lovely, joyful place to be in. So for me, I was homeschooled myself, and I'm homeschooling my own children. I've also written a book on homeschooling. I do this YouTube channel, and I also have a successful blog at howdoihomeschool.com. So I know a lot about it. I love homeschooling. I'm a bit of a homeschooling nut because I've seen how effective it can be and how wonderful homeschooling is for children. So go and check it out. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about starting homeschooling, you can do that by checking out this video, a playlist over here on starting homeschooling. Or if you're thinking, hey, I really want to have a look more at the homeschooling methods, you can do that by checking out this video right here.